Usually when you start meditating, you're going to fall asleep anyways. So what I used to do is just meditate and then lay down, fall asleep, and then have a lucid dream, have an out-of-body experience.
I know how to search your mind and find your secrets. I know the tricks, and I can teach them to you so that even when you're asleep, your defense is never down.
Astral body starts to vibrate and lift up off, like you can literally feel it come up off your physical body. I was in space with this blonde hair, blue eye, white skin, some kind of uniform he was wearing. This being, a human-like being, nothing strange about this being at all. In fact, I truly felt like it was my family. I felt completely comfortable with this man.
Instead of putting your trust in the pharmaceutical medicine, you should be putting your trust in the one who can really save you.
You're listening to Canary Cry Radio. Now here are your hosts, Basil and Gonz.
Hey everyone, welcome again to Canary Cry Radio. Thanks for tuning in this week. My name's Basil.
And I'm Gonz. We are talking about more rat brains today.
More rat stuff.
More awesome. Rat stuff. So we're going to talk about this article that came out. It's basically these neuroscientists claim to have figured out a way to influence or control the dreams of rats. And so this article sort of speculates, are humans next?
Right. I mean, okay, just to start from the very beginning, I had no idea that rats even had dreams, that was a thing. And I'm wondering how they know that.
Right.
But, I mean, I assume dogs have dreams. Dogs do weird stuff when they sleep. So right. I guess we can transfer over to rats there. I don't know if they watch the rats move their legs like they're running or something.
I think what they do is they measure the brain waves of certain parts of the brain, and they're obviously measuring it while they're awake and doing their thing. Right. And then, when they're sleeping, they have the same nodes and whatnot on the brain, and then they figure that if the rat is the same part of the brain is being stimulated, then the rat is dreaming and
right, all sorts of sciencey type stuff.
Right, like the same sensation as walking, or this part of the brain fires up while he's sleeping, but the same part is firing up so therefore he must be dreaming that he's walking. So
right. Well, yeah, that's actually interesting because I think this was something that I mentioned before a couple episodes ago, was where they've concluded that when you're watching TV or when you're watching somebody else do something, your brain will fire in the same way. It starts reacting as if you're watching people running on the Olympics, your brain will start reacting as if you were the one running. Or right. We talked about video games where, your body will have massively intense physical reactions just because your brain is under so much stress. So I get that connection. But yeah, this is actually really fascinating. And I know messing with dreams and stuff isn't anything new.
Yeah.
Especially by the way of, lucid dreaming and things like that. But that's all for another episode, I think. Or who knows? Maybe we'll just get into it later.
Yeah, we'll see. We'll see if we go down that rabbit trail. But basically, let me quote just this paragraph here that sort of sums it all up. A couple paragraphs. Researchers working at MIT have successfully manipulated the content of a rat's dream by replaying an audio cue that was associated with the previous day's events, namely running through a maze. What else? The breakthrough furthers our understanding of how memory gets consolidated during sleep, but it also holds potential for the prospect of dream engineering.
Right.
And I find that interesting that I would say that they're not even 100% certain that they controlled the dreams of the rat. They just basically got the same brainwave reaction to...
Right, just kind of like a recall.
Yeah, really. It's not really necessarily... I don't think there's any way to really prove 100% without a shadow of a doubt that the rat was dreaming, and
right.
The scientists were able to affect his dream by reintroducing the sound.
Right. I sort of see this in the same context of whispering weird stuff in your roommate's ear while he's sleeping or something. That's, you can manipulate what people are dreaming about. I assume in that way. I haven't seen any scientific studies on that.
Right. Well,
but
you just reminded me, in Japan, at least when I was a kid, and maybe they had this in America too, and I didn't grow up in Japan, but I just remember seeing people or hearing people talking about these like night tapes or something. And
Right.
and I think I had even a couple friends whose parents like made them listen to these positive thinking tapes or something while they sleep.
Right,
When
exactly.
They have these soothing sounds and they have these, you are wonderful and like all this
Yeah.
stuff. And, it's probably the same sort of thing. And who knows
sure.
if it works. I'm sure it does to some level.
Well, there's sleep learning and stuff like that too. Again, I don't know the data on that, but I remember being younger and trying, putting on like a Spanish speaking CD like while I sleep, and like expecting to wake up knowing Spanish.
Did it work?
No, I don't think so. ¿Cómo está? No, I have no idea. I suck at Spanish.
Yeah.
But anyways, moving on. And they go to talk about more about memory processing and stuff like that. They kind of have a heavy emphasis on sort of what this means for memory processing and things like that. And so, which is basically what they're doing. They're signaling something from, a memory that the rat would have from the day before.
Right.
Which, I mean, the rats are running through mazes their entire life. I would assume that that's what they dream about anyways.
Yeah. I was thinking that too.
Yeah. But, all right.
Yeah. So this is the final paragraph of the short little article here.
Sure.
It says, looking ahead, the researchers believe that this simple example of dream engineering could open up the possibility of more extensive control of memory processing during sleep, and even the notion that selected memories could be either enhanced, blocked, or modified. Wilson is aiming to develop new approaches to learning and behavioral therapy through similar kinds of cognitive manipulation.
Wilson. And I think this is actually the rather interesting part, because, I mean, when you get into dream manipulation or anything like that, I mean, there's countless movies that sort of deal with that subject, and they're talking about blocking and modifying memories and stuff, all happening during sleep. And I mean, there's movies like Inception, Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, that all sort of deal with that. And of course, we've always seen those problems in those movies. But I mean, what does this mean? What does this mean for us?
Well, there's so many different things to look at. One, I'm a believer that spiritually speaking, God does kind of communicate with us through dreams.
Right.
Not always, but I certainly think that he uses that medium when he has to, or when he can, or I mean, he can always do it, but he does so in a way that it's sort of tailored to the individual.
Right.
It's not. I don't think God does things where it's like, you need to send this message to humanity, and because usually that ends up causing. It just seems to be more.
It never really works out for whoever.
Yeah, and it's always it just echoes a lot about a lot of things that you hear in the New Age and channeling and stuff like that. And
Right.
And so our dreams sort of are our subconscious sort of playing out, and it's strange because I think back to my personal experiences of dreams, and I've had plenty of dreams where it's sort of a, mundane day-to-day type of thing that I was doing, and it's sort of like I'm in that setting. But for most of my life, I would say that my dreams were totally off the wall, bizarre. Yeah, I'm always like flying, and for most of my life, I was getting chased by something. But I would be able to jump super high and like jump on top of buildings and fly through stuff, and I mean it was pretty cool. But in essence, being able to control someone's memory processing during sleep, that to me is sort of strange and dangerous because, our memories are kind of what make us who we are in a sense. I mean, not entirely, but they
they influence it in the same way that experience would, I would think.
Right. And it sort of shapes our lives, and it sort of gives us the wisdom and the lessons and knowledge and things like that we won't have without the memory of our past experience. So to block it, to modify it or enhance it or whatever, I mean, that's really playing or messing with some core things of being a human, because
Right. Well, I think it's the same sort of problem or issue as the whole lucid dreaming sort of debate. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I mean, there's people who say lucid dreaming opens you up to all sorts of bad things, and then there's people who think, well, it's not really, it's just you.
Right.
And then, and you know what I mean? And how could it, how harmful could it be to, if you want to fly, to just fly in your dream or whatever. But then you get into the whole thing where, like, well, while you're sleeping, the veil is thinner and all this,
right.
You're opened up to all sorts of things, which we've talked about before, which totally, I believe, has its own reality in what we're talking about.
Right.
And I think that's an interesting to talk about, the whole lucid dreaming thing, because, I've lucid dreamt. Most people have lucid dreamt.
Yeah.
They say that everybody has, and whether they remember it or not. And the New Age sort of crowd connects lucid dreaming with astral projection and things like this. And, well, obviously we're taught that astral projection isn't necessarily a benign thing to do. But if it's happening automatically, if it's just happening, then what are we supposed to take away from that?
I don't know. I think that depends on the individual and what they experience from it. But going back a little bit to sort of the article here, it's
sure
to influence one's dreams and effectively their memory, their blocking, modifying, all this stuff.
Well, it's just another case of playing God. It's another.
Yeah, that's
it's on the continuum of playing God, and it's just another situation where we need to decide, where on the continuum we're allowed to reside.
Right, and okay, so I'm trying to tie two things together here, and I have two thoughts in my head, and I'm trying to get it out at once, and that's why I'm struggling here. But
tie it.
Okay, so I've listened to a lot of New Age teaching, and one of the common teachings about dreams is that every person you encounter in your dreams is a reflection of yourself.
Right.
And so if you meet someone mean in your dream, then that is a reflection of yourself, and you must defeat that mean person to, get to know your higher self and blah, blah, blah. So, and that concept, and then trying to go from this end of like, okay, we can control your dreams. You're really struggling with that inner self of, your angry person, your angry you. Well, let's go in there and let's defeat this angry you.
Right.
So,
well, and there's a lot of like hypnotist New Age combinations that try to go in and do that too.
Right, exactly.
It's just a part of self-development.
Well, that's what's interesting about this is that it's sort of like, and I think this is a great example of how science and spirituality are starting to sort of merge. They're starting the line between the two are starting to blur. I think quantum physics started sort of the merge. And to be quite honest, I think prior to like the 1800s, it really wasn't that separate. Like again, we've mentioned this before, but the concept of like God created the universe and we're just trying to understand the creation. So there was sort of a spiritual understanding, and then now for the last century, it's been totally separated, and I think they're sort of coming
which I think
together.
is good. I think it's good that they're coming back together. I think that was the original intention in my own belief, but because I believe that science and spirituality are at the very core definitely connected, but now this is approaching that in a different way, in sort of a twisted sort of way.
Right, exactly. It's sort of coming back together for the purposes of the greatest evil you can ever imagine type thing.
Right.
So,
right.
So yes, there is I think a genuine form of understanding spirituality through science, and that's the way God made it. But the way that the materialistic science is approaching it, and they're starting to discover things, I think, that are just, it's funny because I would be curious to find out if this person Wilson here, who did this experiment, believes in a sort of a spiritual reality or not, because obviously he's manipulating the physical material sort of realm, but a dream is, in any kind of thought or emotion or anything like that, those aren't just chemicals in the brain, it's a little bit more than that. So,
right. Well, and I don't want to get too mixed up in talking about that, but in what I'm about to bring up, which is we always talk about the direct correlation between the physical and the spiritual and how much they might be the same thing.
Right.
You know what I mean? So, I mean, I think it's a possibility that the whole brain chemistry thing is built right into the spiritual realities that govern everything. That being said, it doesn't really have a lot of weight in what we're trying to figure out. I think it does have a lot of weight.
Well, yeah.
Because I mean, if again, I refer to this a lot, but the sort of Jewish belief where your soul and your body are not quite, they're not separated. They are the same thing, which is kind of really shunned upon by a lot of other, religious institutions, being, like, oh, but there's your body and your spirit and your soul, and they're all different. Well, and we talk about this when we talk about DNA and Doug Hamp and all those guys is, well, maybe not though.
Right. Yeah. The concept there that you're referring to is the fact that when a physical body and a spirit come together, it creates the human soul. And it's actually, that idea is derived from a Bible verse that talks about, the body of dust but
sure. But you know what I mean?
Yes.
Which is the spiritual consequences of physical actions or realities or things like that, which I think would put a lot of weight, even more spiritual weight than we could have before, knowing that now when you start messing with the chemicals of the brain, it's more than just affecting your physical body for your physical experience on Earth.
Right. Yeah, no, that's a really good point.
And I think that's what gives the whole weight to the whole thing of, and we'll get into this later with drugs and brain chemistry, messing with it in any number of ways.
Right. So I think they're trying they're trying a little too hard, I would say, to jump the gun and talk about how it could be used on humans and memory and all this stuff.
Right.
Because even if they can, I mean, how would you sell this to the public? Like what
well, I'll tell you exactly how, and I'm glad you just asked that, because this is coming out at it's very timely that we're talking about this, actually, because there's a new movie, Total Recall. Well, it's not new. It's a remake. It's not new. Yeah. Where it's basically which is basically that.
Right. Yeah.
And so yeah, I mean, I think it's being sold right now. It's being sold to us in the media, like everything else.
Right.
Already, and it's an older movie that's being remade, so this is nothing new.
Yeah. By the way, I saw Total Recall on an airplane when I was like 9 years old, and I totally just tripped out. I was totally freaked out, especially the scene at the end where Arnold's face gets all big and explodes and stuff. It was just like, what the heck just happened?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a trippy movie, and the new one just promises to be just as trippy.
Awesome.
I mean, I think it's all around us all the time. Anything that has to do with sort of mastering our experience is just innately attractive.
Right.
And it's easy to feed off of that, and it's easy to fall into that. And it's sort of like connected to the same lucid dreaming thing. It's not necessarily the act of doing it that would be considered wrong, by some sort of religious standard, which is debatable, but it's the desire to control everything.
Right. And also the potential of running into, entities.
Oh, yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
when you start messing around. Exactly. And that happens all the time. I was reading on some new age stuff, just doing some research, and they tell you, they'll say, okay, so here's how you're going to lucid dream, and then if you want, you can move into astral projection, but blah, blah, blah. But there's a chance you're going to run into dark beings or mean spirits. They tell you this.
Yeah.
They say, and if you do, and some guys will be like, only try to do this if you're spiritually mature, and because you'll run into darker beings and with bad energy, and you need to be able to blah, blah, blah. And then, it's a warning from the people who are wanting you to do it more.
Right.
And I mean, we've talked about my experiences. We've talked to Rob Skiba about it. And so, yeah, I mean, I think it's definitely a huge facet to this whole conversation now that we start branching out like that.
Well, and of course, biblically speaking, the Satan appears in the angel of light, and so it's no surprise that his angels appear as ministers of righteousness. And I've talked to people who have been really deep into sort of lucid dreaming and astral projection and stuff like that. And they didn't think it was a bad thing. And,
Right.
and I recall, I can't remember who told me this, but they had a friend or something that came across just this beautiful spiritual entity. Like, it was like the most amazing looking, just, very colorful and whatnot. But the guy just felt like it was wrong, like something was
Right.
wrong,
Right.
and then
Yeah,
so
no,
he
I've-
stopped
I've-
and ran, and he never, he decided to stop doing all that stuff. But I mean, I don't think people realize how real it is. It's not just like, oh yeah, it's just sort of your imagination and blah blah blah.
Right.
No, I think it's real.
Right. And there's even things I've seen, little gadgets, just on little gadget websites. I kind of cruise around those once in a while. And there's these goggles that you can wear, and you wear them on your face when you go to bed, and then like, I can't remember, like an hour in or something, it's timed with whatever the sleep patterns are,
Right.
the REM sleep and everything like that. It's timed, and then it starts blinking in your face. Like, the goggles are
Awesome.
blinking right in your face, and that's supposed to like induce a lucid dream, or sort of signal to your mind that it's time to start doing stuff. Dang it,
Time to start waking up the cricket is what it is.
that dang cricket's back. Cool. The cricket again? Jeez.
Back. The revenge of the cricket.
I know. I guess he's tired of the molasses pool I put out.
Well, it just reminded me as we were talking about this, and we're sort of going down a rabbit trail of different things here. But
No, I think this is awesome, though.
Dr. Future has talked about the pineal gland, and
Right.
I had heard prior to Dr. Future talking about it, I had heard David Wilcock do a full like New Age angle expose on the pineal gland, and
The entire New Age thing is based around the pineal gland,
yeah,
basically.
and there is some really strange stuff going on with, like, the Pope holding a staff with the pine cone on it, the giant pine cone in
Right.
the middle of the Vatican. And I mean, there's some obvious references to the pine cone, and it's like, oh, what's going on with that,
Right.
And, Dr. Future hypothesizes or theorizes, I guess, that, when we were kicked out of the garden, there was some sort of, closing off to the spiritual world, and perhaps the pineal
Right.
gland was sort of that gateway
Right.
where we were able to access the spiritual world into the physical. And then, that makes sense in terms of dreams and...
Isn't the pineal gland calcified over or something like that?
Yeah. What happens is, okay, so this is sort of the New Age view of it, is that, the New World Order and the Illuminati and stuff, they don't want us to reconnect with the spiritual world. So that's why they're giving us all these GMOs and all this, food that is really bad for our bodies, because it calcifies the pineal gland and closes off even more our ability to access the spiritual realm or whatever. That's sort of their
Right.
take on, why the Illuminati are bad and why
Right,
they,
and I think that makes sense. That
Yeah, it makes
might
sense
be a
to-
reality.
it's
I'm
possible,
open
yeah.
to that being a reality.
Well-
Like I said, the physical and the spiritual are very tightly knit, in my opinion, and I could totally see that being a thing. I've even heard that the casting from the garden, it can be interpreted as the closing off of the pineal gland.
well,
and
that's what I
things
was
like that.
That's what I was saying.
Right.
That's what Dr. Future was saying too. And
Right.
And the there's a couple different ways to think about it though, because on one hand, yeah, maybe the elite want to close off our access to the spiritual realm and they want it all for themselves. But on the other end, when you look at the Book of Revelation, there's some pretty crazy stuff that happens, and it does seem like the sort of spiritual world and the veil between the two gets really, really thin. And
Right.
there's and sort of different gateways open up and stuff like that. And I don't know, maybe there is this push to open it up in a certain way, open up only a certain element of it to allow certain entities through or something. You know what
Yeah,
I
I mean,
don't
it totally makes sense. Yeah, I could totally see that being something. I mean, there's no, I have not personally seen any evidence for it. I haven't done the research. That's not my area.
Right. Well, okay. So this is the verse that that Dr. Future looks at to sort of get into this, and we need to have Dr. Future on soon, and we will. Okay. So in the light of a lamp will shine in you no more, and the voice of bridegroom and bride will be heard in you no more. For your merchants were the great ones of the earth, and all nations were deceived by your sorcery. This is Revelation 18:23, and the word sorcery is the word pharmakeia, and it's medicine, drugs, spells, things like that. So, what could be that these merchants and stuff, and when I heard Dr. Future say this, I was really intrigued, and I sort of did my own digging on, the pharmaceutical company, and there's some good videos out there that sort of expose the pharmaceutical company and how horrible it is.
I mean, it's completely common knowledge that pharmaceutical companies are evil and for so many reasons.
Right.
But what I think is interesting is the transhumanist push for drugs, like things like SSRIs, and and we have something here.
That's a good segue there.
Thank you for pointing that out. We have this thing here talking about the push to make SSRIs and things like that. SSRIs are selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, which is an antidepressant type thing.
Right.
And they would like it to be more widely available, not necessarily just for, clinically depressed people or things like that.
Right. And there's this article referring, it's not really an article, it's actually sort of it looks like a forum or a conversation or something that happened. I guess, no, it's a Facebook thread that happened and the name of it is Abolishing Suffering via Bioengineering Drugs. Would this cripple social activism and art? And this, there's various people that are commenting, and this one particular comment is sort of what caught our attention. And this person says, should we have policies that make SSRI medicine more widely available? I myself am not sure what the right answer would be, but yesterday I gave some thought for it. Here is the argument for it. If the human brain reacts to its environment, and if the modern way of life, urban living and working, raises the risk for depression and mood shifts, then should it not be good if we could medicate the masses? There are two alternatives. Either we create a sporty, feel-good society, cultural change, or we create an easy access to mood medicine, medical change. The first takes a long time. The latter works faster. Also, people who use SSRI medicine tend to be on a better mood, and therefore they could be interested in making a social change for a happier and better society.
Oh my goodness! It's just such a circular argument. I mean, it's just a disaster. Thinking about this and reading this guy's thing is just unbelievable to me. I mean, am I the only one who sees how ridiculous that is?
Well, no, it's totally ridiculous because the two alternatives that this person proposes is either we culturally change it and we take SSRIs altogether, or we medically influence it and everyone takes SSRIs. Ultimately, we want everyone to be happy,
right.
Joy.
Well, I mean, and it's just, and the Eastern worldview is very good at this, which is do the work to make a happy society. Like, this is, this is just simple, ancient, wisdom. Yeah, exactly. You do the work, and in doing the work to make a happy society, you make everybody happy. You don't make a terrible society and then drug everybody into being happy. I mean, it's just completely backwards thinking. And like I said this at the very beginning of Canary Cry Radio many episodes ago. I mentioned that I think we're moving towards a Huxleyan society. Aldous Huxley and the Brave New World, where everybody's drugged up and having orgies and doing things like this, instead of and that's the form of control, is give everybody everything they want, and they'll be easier to control. As opposed to an Orwellian society where it's just very,
it's
locked down,
fear-driven.
Fear-driven.
There's a great quote by a guy named Neil Postman. I may have quoted this before on the show. I don't remember, but it's from a book called "Amusing Ourselves to Death: Public Discourse in the Age of Show Business." And in this introduction, he sort of compares Orwell and Huxley, and I just think it's a great quote. He says, "What Orwell feared were those who would ban books. What Huxley feared was that there would be no reason to ban a book, for there would be no one who wanted to read one.
Yep.
Orwell
exactly.
feared. It's kind of a long. Sorry.
No, keep going. I'm just. Yeah, bro.
Orwell feared those who would deprive us of information. Huxley feared those who would give us so much that we would be reduced to passivity and egoism. Orwell feared that the truth would be concealed from us. Huxley feared the truth would be drowned in a sea of irrelevance. That's so true today. Orwell feared we would become a captive culture. Huxley feared we would become a trivial culture, preoccupied with some equivalent of the feelies, the orgy-porgy, and the centrifugal bumblepuppy. As Huxley remarked in Brave New World Revisited, the civil libertarians and rationalists who are ever on the alert to oppose tyranny failed to take into account man's almost infinite appetite for distractions. In 1984, Huxley added, "People are controlled by inflicting pain. In Brave New World, they are controlled by inflicting pleasure." In short,
Right.
Orwell feared that what we hate will ruin us. Huxley feared that what we love will ruin us. This
Right.
book
No.
is about the possibility that Huxley, not Orwell, was right.
Right, no, and that's precisely correct. But now that I actually think about it, I do want to revise what I'm saying. I do believe that they are both happening at the exact same time. And I think that's the brilliance of the whole plan.
Yeah.
You know? I
Well,
mean,
yeah.
we obviously live in this Huxleyian culture where, all sorts of pleasures are pushed upon us now. But at the same time, this sort of Orwellian lockdown is happening behind the scenes.
Well, I think it seems like, yeah, you're right, both is happening. It seems like more in the medical, technological, scientific realm, it's more of a Huxley view, Brave New World-ish view of like, oh, we're going to, save the world by, inducing drugs and everyone's just going to be happy and we're going to enhance the brain and we're not going to feel any more pain. It's a sort of like, pushing pleasure to bring about this happy, peaceful world. Whereas the sort of government, political, economic, that side of things is sort of pushing fear, like, oh, the economy is going to crash and,
Right.
we're going to take over and martial law and like all this stuff. And it's sort of fear driven,
Well, it's almost like the fear-driven part pushes you into the pleasure seeking.
Yeah. Well, I think they play off each other, certainly. And
Right.
they definitely gain ground from each other,
Right.
And I think also that someone who may be disenchanted with sort of the government and all that stuff will turn to science and say science is the way. And
Right.
there are a lot of people who are scientists and they're technologists and futurists and things like that believe and they put their faith totally in science, in technology, in this advancement of enhancing humans and all this stuff. It's just interesting as a believer in the Bible and a believer in God to look at it and say, you guys are putting your faith in that, and then the
Right.
government people or political whatever, they're putting their faith in themselves as like the ones that are going to solve the issue. And
I know.
and it's very strange because they don't really,
depressing.
yeah, they don't really see it. They don't recognize like. For example, one of the guy who started this article here, Hank Pellissier or something. I think I mentioned this before too, but I wrote an article kind of systematically tearing apart his view of like why we should enhance our brain and like change parts of our brain so we don't feel any more emotional pain and blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
And he sort of responded and said, I don't believe in God, so therefore I believe that we must improve the brain. And it was just so strange how it was.
It's
just
hard to argue with that,
Well,
really.
I know, but it was just very strange how it was so, just not having a belief in God, just that alone causes one to have such a different view of reality of the world and place their faith in something that is so finite. It's just really strange to me that
Right.
you would ever want to place your
Right,
faith.
well,
Humans
that's
don't
just-
have that great of a track record on their own, so.
Yeah, and I mean that's just the small world that some people live in. I mean the universe and the world and just everything is just so tiny to some people that putting their faith in something like that is like, is the saving grace that they're looking for. When
Right.
in reality, especially these guys who are so it's almost ironic how much knowledge they have of the universe and how astounded they are by it and how the greatness that they grasp in the way, the quantum physics and the awe and the splendor that is reality and existence, and then they will put all of that and the improvement of all of it just into their own hands, and it's just very small-minded, I believe.
Right.
I mean, I get it. I get the desire to work, and the desire to improve things.
Right.
But it's just very ironic in how I look at it.
Yeah, and sort of continuing on with this thread of conversations that happened here. One of the topics that came up was art, and I think we should touch on it. I think it's interesting. Somebody mentioned that good art has to come from pain, and it's sort of interesting because I personally, that was sort of a crisis for me when I became born again, if you will.
Right.
I wouldn't necessarily use that phrase, I guess, with Johnny Iron, but
After the whole Johnny Iron
yeah,
thing.
well,
Yeah.
I mean, I'm just going to use it anyway because I still
Sure,
think it's a
sure.
valid sort of statement. But yeah, once I became a believer and I declared my faith in Yeshua and everything else, I had a real struggle. One of the first things that I struggled with was, well, what do I do with because my identity was, I'm a songwriter and
Right.
I am a musician, and that's where I gain my identity and my purpose, and
Yeah.
and I write about the pain that I feel. I write about my music is a channel for my anger and my hate for the world and all this stuff. So it was like
Right.
all this negative stuff, and then as soon as I became a believer, all those things were lifted. I mean, there were obviously some residual effects and stuff like that lasted a few years, and still
Right.
dealing with some of that stuff, obviously, that
Yeah,
I think
yeah.
we all do. But in overall sort of sense, I really had a hard time because I was sitting there going, well, what do I do? I don't feel like writing angry music anymore.
Right. Well, I would personally disagree with that statement that all good art comes out of pain and suffering.
Right.
I believe that art connects with people in different ways.
Right.
If somebody creates something out of anguish, it'll connect and sort of instill that or communicate that anguish to whoever the observer will be.
Right.
And I do believe that. But that can also happen in all sorts of ways.
Right. Yeah, it obviously
hope,
can happen
art out of-
positively. Go ahead. Sorry.
Right. And at the same time, I've heard that if I go on medication, I'll lose my artistic ability and I will, whatever.
Right.
But at the same time, if you look at the facts and what a lot of, the argument against that would be, well, if you're happy, you're gonna be more productive in general.
Right. Well,
You
yeah,
know?
and I think obviously, music sort of shapes your mood anyway. So like if you're feeling sad and angry, you want to hear something sad or whatever. If you want to, if you're feeling pretty good, you want to hear good, music that's sort of uplifting and whatnot. And it's kind of funny because I think the mindset of like, good music is comes from a negative, emotional place or whatever. It's sort of obviously it's preference for one thing, but I think music has always been sort of a social commentary of the times.
Yeah.
And I think it just reflects what society is going through. And if the society is going through some negative points, and the music reflects that, and it's like you said, it just connects to the people. And if it so happens that a lot of people are, feeling, it's kind of like if you think about, the Northwest and the grunge scene, there are like all these people that were rebelling and they had this rebellious nature, and then Nirvana comes out and it's like they become the voice of that rebellion,
Yeah.
So it's sort of again, I think it's a social commentary more than necessarily a 1-to-1 ratio of pain equals good music or anything like that. So, but anyway, going back to sort of the drugs and all this stuff. Okay, so this person named Mike replies to a bunch of these comments and asks a couple different questions. He says, "Why do you need art when you are perpetually happy and super genius? Genetically altering the outlook is a tricky thing, but when death has been transcended, what has anyone to worry about?" And that mindset sort of is really telling. again, it plays on the whole thing of what they're trying to do. They're trying to transcend death. They're trying to bring about this perpetually happy world where everyone's sort of happy. But
Right.
At the core here, what is it that drives humanity to want that in the first place? And it's just ironic that what we're promised through the scriptures and everything else is that sort of eternal joy and being with the Creator, and
Right.
it's the same thing. It's just very strange how
It's the same sort of thing. I mean, I've said this so many times, and I'm sure everybody's gonna just be so tired of hearing it, which is, I get it. Like, wanting everybody to be happy is not a bad thing.
right.
Wanting happiness to spread around the world is a good thing. But I mean, that's just the basis of where the deception starts. Where, and going back to sort of the Eastern worldview thing, where happiness is not the goal, it's the journey, stuff like that.
Right.
Where, I mean, they had a few things figured out that we here in the West admittedly do not have under control. And but I mean, just this push for the widespread use of pharmaceuticals in a legal sense, it's just pushing the line. I think we can all agree with that, or maybe not. If you don't agree, let us know. I mean, I personally don't think that, and it actually makes me wonder if there was anything of this nature going on in Babylon or by Nimrod or anything. I don't have any research, but it just sort of came to me. But it would be interesting to find somebody or to do a study on, ancient uses of drugs. Or I know there's all sorts of ceremonial stuff, but I mean, was there something like that could have been a part of, a dystopian ancient society?
I think it's interesting to note that this whole thing of happiness and drugs and all this, and referring to what you said, I'm not exactly sure if Nimrod had some sort of drug thing to the masses to try to keep everyone happy, but a lot of cults, and especially I'm going to butcher this. Someone's going to someone's going to go crazy about misquoting the name, and I actually don't know the name of the person, but I do know that there is this Islamic, and I don't have this information in front of me, I'm just trying to go off the top of my head. There's I think it was like a Muslim faction or something like that, where the way he convinced his people, or the people, that they're going to go to heaven and they're going to enjoy life or whatever if they follow him, and he's like the Messiah of some whatever, was that he would invite all these people in. And this is sort of a cult tactic as well. They would invite people into a room or whatever, and he would give them a big meal, and the meal would just be completely spiked with like hash, So they get completely high, and they're totally their brains are blown out. Well, in that process, while they're totally blitzed, he takes all of them into this garden, this beautiful garden in the center of his palace or whatever.
Right.
And all these women come out and they do things, and they they give them this sort of crazy euphoric experience. And then as they come down, the leader guy, he says, "Hey, look, you guys have just experienced heaven. This is what you can have for eternity if you follow me." And it's that sort of idea of inducing pleasure to create followers and devoted followers,
Right. It totally makes sense.
Yeah, and that's sort of I guess a microcosm of
just another control mechanism.
Yeah, exactly. And I would say there's different kinds of ways that you can rely on your leaders, but I think in some sense Nimrod, because he was sort of a mighty hunter, I think it's quite possible that he was just a really awesome dude or whatever. Like he
I'm sure.
He was just like gnarly.
I'm sure
and
that wasn't the cause for his
right
gaining control. But I mean, you just, with all the sorts of things, even if we go back, into the antediluvian civilizations, who knows? That might have been a whole nother situation.
Right.
But this whole thing with the SSRIs in particular reminds me of another movie, Equilibrium, which was a good movie.
That was a good movie.
Christian Bale,
Yeah.
Go check it out. Where, everybody on a daily basis was required to inject this drug,
Right.
and which was used for control and sort of numbed them to, any sorts of emotions. And so when you start hearing about, every citizen gets issued, your ration of, antidepressant medicine. Here you go. It just reeks of stay happy so we can do what we want to do. It's just just another control mechanism.
It sort of makes sense from the mind of the one who's trying to control, because it's like, as long as you're happy, I mean,
right. Well, exactly.
It's like, who cares? Like, you're happy. Like,
It's the whole debate about the whole thing is like, well, if you're happy, I mean, you're happy. Welcome to being a human being and happy. I mean, what else could you ask for,
right,
really?
Exactly.
If you're happy, you're happy. You don't want other things. You're not questioning authority. You're not doing anything. And I think that is a legitimate debate to have. I mean, we could stand up on our soapboxes and say, like, this isn't real happiness. Da, da, da. I think we can do that. I think that would be the automatic response for most of us. But instead of, and this is what I love to do, instead of automatically taking that position, which more than likely is the right position, I mean, let's open up and let's think about that. I think that's a good thing to address.
Right. Well,
anybody listening who might think that, hey, if you're all happy, then we're happy. That's the bait. That's what else could you ask for in the human existence?
Right. Well, I tend to believe that is the crux of the Great Deception. However it may turn out, if it's aliens or if it's, ancient civilizations discovered or whatever it may be, that is the hinge upon which this new world order is going to be established, this world kingdom type thing,
right?
Technologically or however, it's going to be predicated on the fact that, hey, now we can be happy. All of us can be happy. What's wrong with that? And obviously the Christians are going to be the only ones saying it's a lie, and obviously that we are going to be the ones holding back progress and so on. So
I mean, we're so traditional. We're so boring.
You guys are hypocrites. You guys are on the computer.
Yeah. The internet's technology. But I mean, and that was a big thing with Obama was, a huge selling point. And if you ask me, one of the main reasons why he got elected was because he promised, I mean, he made a lot of promises, but one of his promises was to, decriminalize, legalize marijuana. I mean, that was a huge amount of his votes. Being a young person, I just know that is a fact. I'm just saying, No,
I know, and well, that's funny too because, well, just alluding to Obama just a bit here, but he promised a lot of. I mean, every candidate for presidency promises change. It's sort of a hook word or whatever.
Yes.
But I think most of the population, and we'll get into this probably maybe in another show before the elections or something, but most of the population doesn't really know what they want changed. Like, There's no consensus on what needs to be changed or whatever. They're just like, oh yeah, change, hope, yes, hope. We need hope. A hope in what? Change in what? Like, what are you guys talking about? But anyway, that's a whole nother rabbit trail. We won't go down right now. But
yeah, exactly. Yeah, no, but exactly. And I think it will happen. I honestly think that will happen at one point or another. If not for it have being prophesied to, it's just the way that things are going.
Right. There's a core human issue as well where, abolishing suffering via bioengineering and drugs. Abolishing suffering, again, like you said, and most people probably agree is a good thing. We want to abolish suffering. But one of my, I guess, points of asking the question to these folks would be, well, what is it about suffering that you want to abolish? What is it about evil or suffering or whatever you want to call it? What is it about it that you don't like? You know what I mean? Because I think that might, I don't know, maybe it won't, but it should at least stir in your mind where they are getting that objective line of reference of what is being violated here. Like,
Right.
what is it that is actually being violated? And if you're saying that it's sort of a relative thing, like, oh, bad is bad and it might be bad for you, but it's good for me, well, then it doesn't really matter what anyone thinks. But if you're saying that there is sort of a clear understanding, an external point of reference of a moral basis of which we, declare as suffering, then you're starting to suggest that there's some sort of external law,
Right. No,
sort
yeah,
of moral
absolutely.
law
I mean, that's
imposing.
C.S. Lewis's famous,
It's the
argument.
It's the moral argument, yeah. by
Right,
C.S. Lewis,
exactly.
yeah. Okay, so what do you think, Basil? Do you think this stuff is going to be used for mind control? Like, do you think drugs already is used for mind control? Like, even
I think,
recreational drugs is used for mind control?
I think so. I mean, maybe not mind control in the sense that, there's some DARPA station out there, attempting to mind control us with drugs. But I mean, really, mind control is a pretty loose term.
Right.
And we would have to define it in different ways. But, I don't think, oh my goodness, but there's, okay, yes, I think so. I think in a lot of ways, yes. But it's in more of a cultural influence type of way. The CIA passing out, crack and LSD and things like this, which is pretty, this is just common knowledge now, where and the U.S. being deeply enrooted in the drug trade and things like this.
Totally.
I mean, it's obvious that is what they want to happen, and I think in that sense, where it is a cultural manipulation, I do believe that yes, that is a form of mind control.
Here's what's so funny, I think. So let's take marijuana, for example. Totally illegal, right? Let's take it. Okay, so
legal.
It's totally illegal, right? But then you have big time entertainment, like corporate entertainment media heads or whatever, promoting through musicians and rappers or whatever, like let's get high and bongs and all this stuff, and it's like, you know what I mean? Isn't that kind of like I always thought it was weird that.
See, that's kind of what I was thinking too. Is I don't know if it's necessarily the executives making that decision. I think the freedom is given to display that sort of thing, but that's where I see it as more of a cultural thing than a corporate thing. Or just an individual thing.
Yeah, and it's funny. I did a little study on prison systems and stuff in America and other countries, and this is a while ago. But I found out that a lot of these really big drug lords that go to jail, they figure out a way to operate their whole cartel from the prison system.
Completely, yeah.
Which is really funny because it's like, what's the point of having a prison if they're totally controlling everything from the inside anyway? And I mean, I went through all the different ways they do it, and they've tried to crack down on all the simple ways. Like they used to put, even stuff in Bibles, where they would cut out a little section of the book and they would put little messages in there, and there was different ways they would crypt letters and things like that. Every fourth letter, and then it creates a whole other message, and they had all sorts of stuff, but. Not only is it culturally integrated, but it is sort of perpetuated by the authorities in a way that if they really wanted to crack down on the drug war or the war on drugs or whatever, they probably could have done it already. But the fact that...
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that just brings up the whole joke that is the drug war.
Right.
And how much it is strictly... oh, my goodness. It's just the whole thing, again, of the duality and creating enemies out of nothing.
Right.
Whether drugs are or are not objectively bad, the war on drugs is not a war on drugs. I mean, the same government who is perpetuating this war on drugs is the same government who is daily smuggling drugs into the country. Right. And creating drugs and giving them out, and not on top of
I know, man. I know, man. You can't even put it into words because I know so much, man. It's great. Yeah, I totally hear what you're saying. I
guess the point is that we're here already. It's here already. It's already happening in It's just in a different form than we expect it to, and that's the whole beauty of the whole plan.
Right.
But do I think that 50% of the country is already taking
Right.
Antidepressants or some medication in general.
Yeah, and
okay.
Go ahead. Sorry.
I'm just gonna. Yeah, it's already 50%. So what's the harm? I could see that as just a speech. Just what's the harm in just putting the other 50% on the stuff, and just making everybody happy?
Right. And it's interesting. That was a point I was going to bring up when after reading Revelation 18:23 about the merchants of the world being deceived by Pharmakeia.
Yeah.
And if you really think about the merchants, you think about the wealthy, and you think about sort of the culture of the ultra wealthy, rich folks. And not everybody, but there is sort of a culture of like, we do drugs and we do, we just drink and party, and that's sort of part of the culture of the rich, famous sort of world.
Yes.
And I think that is sort of a purposeful thing.
Yes.
I know that you always hear, for example, I used to work at this building. The owner of the building was an owner of an NHL hockey team, and very, very, very wealthy, very well known in the community and whatnot. And he was exposed for different things, and one of the things he was exposed for was smuggling drugs from other countries. Mm-hmm. And it was sort of a shock to the community of like, oh my gosh, I can't believe this guy would be doing this, and da-da-da-da-da. But it went away so quickly, Oh, yeah. It was like, the story broke, and then, I remember like pointing it out, like, yo, the guy who runs this building is smuggling cocaine or something from other countries, and they're like, oh yeah, but it wasn't really him, it was like his partner or something, and just the story just died. Right. And my conspiracy brain was going crazy, sitting there going, man, who did he pay off? Who did he, It was just like, wow, and the power of money,
right.
But yeah, just tying in this whole thing of sorcery and the culture.
And it goes in with the, the counterfeit experience. That is also, another aspect of the malevolence that is that. And so, and so that's just an obvious direction to take that debate. And I don't think it's not even a debate, but it's the counterfeit and spreading the counterfeit beyond, simply those who need it or those who use it recreationally. Now, everybody just jump on the bandwagon. Let's make this society a happy one.
Yeah. Well, it's like when MDMA, ecstasy, came out, and it was really popular. And I had a lot of friends that were really into it and stuff, and going to raves. And I mean, it was a whole culture that was built on feel-good drugs.
Right. Yeah. And it's, I even posted in the forum, the Electronic Awakening.
Right.
It talks about the rave culture and especially the use of drugs and just the whole dance floor religious experience.
Yeah. And I again, I had a lot of friends that were into that, and it's always strange because we in our community here, there's sort of a dark side, and there was at one point when I was in high school, there was a gal who like overdosed on ecstasy and passed away and whatnot, and it was really strange because to like just hearing about the people that were her friends and stuff like that, the way they celebrated her life was just doing drugs and going to the rave. I mean, it was just like what? That doesn't make any sense. Like I remember thinking even at the time, like, why would you celebrate the life of someone by doing the thing that killed her? I don't know. It was just very, very bizarre. But anyway, it just shows the amount of just the lack of true source of love and grace and all those things that God provides. When it's not there, people just tend to look for it wherever they can find it, and it's usually not good for you.
Right. Exactly.
Which is. It's just the way things are. And I think you alluded to this in the past, but, God is not like this cosmic police officer, waiting for us to break a commandment so he can, send us to hell and all this stuff. It's more of like,
Right.
these things are there as boundaries because they're good for you. It's not
Right.
it's not because we're trying to, God's trying to kill our party or whatever. But
Right. Buzzkill.
yeah.
No. Yeah, exactly. All right. So there you have it. Crack is whack. Thanks again for tuning in this week to Canary Cry Radio. Make sure to tune in again. In a couple days, we'll have another great conversation for you. And as always, think outside the cage.
Later.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Canary Cry Radio. The show notes for this episode and many others are available at canarycryradio.com. Make sure to connect and like our Facebook page at facebook.com/canarycryradio. Follow us on Twitter at Canary Cry Radio. If you would like to share the show in video format, you can find us on YouTube by searching Canary Cry Radio. Review us on iTunes with 5 stars and give us a thumbs up on stumbleupon.com. We would like to thank those of you who have given us your support, prayers, and donations. If you would like to join us and support Canary Cry Radio financially, you could do so by visiting canarycryradio.com and clicking the support tab. Thanks again for listening, and until next time, remember to think outside the cage.